Welcome to the One Year Book of Mormon. A non-Mormon reads through the Book of Mormon. Mosiah 23, Chapter Overview. Having safely gotten Ammon and King Limhi and their people back to Zarahemla, the focus for the next two chapters is Alma, the righteous young man from several chapters ago who believed the prophet Abinadi, started a church, and began baptizing people. We go back in time to pick up with his story where we left off, with approximately 450 people running away from King Noah's army. We're told that God warns Alma of the coming army, so his people gather up all their belongings, including flocks and grain, and leave before the army gets there, with God supernaturally giving them strength so that Noah's army couldn't overtake them. This raises the same questions as the people of Limhi sneaking out of the city of Nephi at the end of the last chapter, even with supernatural strength, but especially without it, since Limhi and Ammon aren't said to have any power, and there's not said to be any miracles. There is the problem of so many people gathering everything together without being noticed or raising suspicion, and of sneaking out without incident, though they are heavy laden with all their goods, and with their animals leaving not just hoof prints but much excrement marking their path, so that even if they didn't come upon them within a few days, the trail of poop and footprints, or at least a worn path, would give them away for quite some time. Plot hole. The people came to a very beautiful and pleasant land, a land of pure water, where they settle down and build buildings and work hard. They want Alma to be their king, but in verse 7 he says, "Behold, it is not expedient that we should have a king, for thus saith the Lord, Ye shall not esteem one flesh above another, or one man shall not think himself above another. Therefore I say unto you, it is not expedient that ye should have a king." Why didn't this apply to Nephi and the subsequent kings also named Nephi, as well as King Mosiah and all the others that are called kings throughout the Book of Mormon up to this point? He goes on to remind them of wicked kings, bringing up King Noah and his wickedness over the next several verses, and also dragging in many anachronous biblical phrases, including "stand fast in this liberty wherewith ye have been made free," which actually distorts and cheapens the biblical phrase, because Paul was in that verse speaking of the liberty that Christians have in Christ, in contrast to being slaves of the law. As it's being used here, Alma is changing it from spiritual liberty and freedom to being physically free from the wicked King Noah. Verse 16 says, "And now Alma was their high priest, he being the founder of their church." Taking this to a logical conclusion, that the founder of a church is its high priest and the high priest is the founder, this would sound like Jesus was high priest only because he was the founder of his church, which is not entirely anti-biblical, but woefully degrading the headship of Christ. Does it not also have implications over who could be a high priest in the LDS church? Would not only Joseph Smith have this designation so that no other man could be called a high priest? Or if another man was called a high priest, would that not indicate that he had founded that church? Yet we have numerous high priests in the LDS church. Verse 17 continues, "And it came to pass that none received authority to preach or to teach, except it were by him from God. Therefore he consecrated all their priests and all their teachers." This sounds very much like the way churches were started and organized in Joseph Smith's day, but very unlike anything we read of in the Old Testament. The narrative continues by saying that they called the land and the city that they built Helam. Remember, he was the first one baptized by Alma. "And they prospered in the land." Then in verse 21 it says that God seeth fit to chasten his people. Yea, he trieth their patience and their faith. So without any hint that these people had done anything wrong, and despite the oft-repeated claim that the Nephites would prosper and have peace as long as they did right, but have problems if they did wrong, in verse 25 we read that an army of the Lamanites was in the borders of the land, causing the people to seek refuge in the walls of the city. Alma calms their fears, and in verse 27 tells them that God will deliver them. But then we read in verse 29 that while the Lord did soften the hearts of the Lamanites, Alma and company surrendered to the Lamanites, who took possession of the land. The narrative sounds like what happens in verse 30 takes place after Alma and company are captured, but it actually is backtracking a little bit to get the context, though written so poorly as not to explain it well at all. These Lamanites who captured Alma were the same ones who had tried and failed to follow King Limhi and company, but instead found the wicked priests of King Noah, who had settled in the land and named the land after their leader, Amulon. Remember that the priests had previously kidnapped some Lamanite women, and these women are now the wives of the priests. And suffering from Stockholm Syndrome a bit, it sounds like, they plead with their fellow Lamanites not to kill their husbands, so they don't. Instead, Amulon and the other wicked priests join with the Lamanites, and for some odd reason are traveling in the wilderness in search of the land of Nephi. Remember that they lost the trail of the people of Limhi after only 2 days, so it makes no sense that they would have lost their way back to Nephi, being only 2 days' walk from their homeland. Of course, that would be expecting the Book of Mormon to make sense, which is apparently expecting too much. Anyway, while looking for the land of Nephi, they happen upon Alma and his brethren, and promise them their liberty if they show them the way to the land of Nephi. But once they did, the Lamanites renege on their promise and set guards around the land of Helam, with the rest returning to the land of Nephi. But then somehow Amulon is placed in charge of the land of Helam as puppet king to the king of the Lamanites.